Thank you everyone for coming to another Reltio community show. And this one is Master Data Management, a nursery for data governance. Today you have two Chris's. So you have Chris Ilof. He's the Director of Strategic Services here at Reltio. He's been on a few of these in the past, so he's no stranger. And then of course me, I'm the Director of Customer Engagement and Community. Go to the next slide. As usual, there's a little bit of rules. This is live and open mic in a way, so keep yourself on mute. All questions generally are asked in the chat, or you can take yourself off mute to ask those questions. I will make sure your questions that are in chat are asked. We'll just kind of stop Chris and say, hey, look, we have some questions. And this show will be recorded and is being recorded now and be posted to community.reltio.com. Next slide. So we do have some upcoming events. I'm trying to push another one or two for July, but today's call is on MDM, a nursery for data governance, and then one that was canceled but brought back. So excited about this, the ABCs of crosswalks, understanding their purpose and use. And then we have a special one with Fresh Gravity, that they will be doing one on MDM for R&D and IDMP compliance for life science companies. So if you're life science or somewhat into that industry, I think this is going to be a great show for you. And then in July, leading your data strategy with business outcomes description. So Venki will be, he's our leader of product, will be hosting that. And then I'm sure this will be very interesting to everyone. It's a hot topic, leveraging pre-trained machine learning models for efficiency, entity resolution. This is going to be a demo and a conversation with kind of a feature that just came out from Reltio. Next slide. And then lastly, Reltio is sponsoring in a big way a conference in Dallas called Data Driven 2023. It's on October 3rd through 5th. It's in my neck of the woods. I'm in Dallas, Texas. It is in Dallas, and some really great speakers and a great lineup. So we're really excited to be a big sponsor of this big event. It's a modern data management conference. I will be sending out emails to everybody on the community about how to sign up, but it is, you go to reltio.com/data-driven and you can look at the speakers there and everything else. So we are excited to be sponsors of that event. I'm going to hand it over to Chris, and then we can go from there.
All righty. Well, you guys already know me. You don't need to see the picture. You can see me live. So today we're going to talk about, MDM being a nursery for data governance and what the heck that even means, right? But fertile soil for data governance, right? So perfect thing to call it is really a nursery. So we're going to understand first the synergies, right? So where do we have a lot of parallels between MDM and data governance, and why that makes sense that MDM is a nursery for data governance. What the role of MDM in the data governance lifecycle is. So we'll dive in a little bit more deeply into those synergies. We'll talk about MDM being a catalyst, right, to expedite data stewardship and other activities within data governance. And then we'll talk about some of the strategies for implementing MDM with data governance, right? So not necessarily implementing MDM, but just being aware of data governance and MDM as you implement and you build an MDM program, and as you understand and build out your data governance program as well. So when we talk about synergies between the two, it's really about the fact that they are mutualistic. So anyone that's familiar with the DM-Bach wheel of data management, right, knows that data governance is in the center, and then you've got a myriad of different data management capabilities in and around that. And that's because they benefit one another, right? They have this symbiotic relationship where they do better when they live together, if you will, right? A few of the things I want to call out here to pay attention to is that they're both practices, right? And they're practices on a continuum of evolution, which means we're continuously evolving them. We need to look at both data governance and MDM as more than just technology implementations, more than just technology tools around data management and pieces like that. We really need to understand them more fully into business practices, right? Around mastering the data, disseminating mastered data, sharing that data, as well as activating a lot of the governance aspects and building data governance. When you build either one of these practices, your focus should be that these are transformative to the business. These aren't just technology implementations that you walk through, you do the implementation, and business does UAT and walks away, and you've got a thing. That's really not how data governance or MDM really work. Not if you want to be successful anyway. The art of these is focusing on them as a practice, understanding that in and when tools are involved and need to be implemented, that they are something that is kind of an agile approach where you're going to continuously evolve them over time. You're going to keep updating, you're going to add data, things like that. We'll get into a little bit of that activation and some of that life cycle in a little more detail in a moment. Another point that they have in common is that they both have this indirect relationship to business value, which can provide challenges in keeping data stakeholders' attention, right? And keeping them in the fold, keeping them as champions of either program or practice of your data governance or your MDM. It's a similar challenge. Once data stakeholders lose understanding, or if they don't have understanding of the value, it gets really hard to get the necessary business investment to further evolve those practices, and they can stagnate over time, be devoid of value, and really you end up not being successful in MDM or data governance when that happens. So really similar there, that it's key for folks to understand value. Thirdly is, really this mutualistic practices that I kind of talked about a moment ago, but they do benefit from each other, right? So we see when we increase adoption in MDM, we extend data governance, by just simply extending the data. Think of it like you add a new source into MDM, and now all of the data governance capabilities that you're activating within your MDM practice, they're being applied to that new set of data, and you've just extended data governance even further, as well as extending your network of data owners that we'll talk about in a few minutes as well. And inversely, data governance, we see when data governance is further matured in organizations, when we implement MDM implementations go much more easily. MDM practices evolve much more quickly with a more evolved and more mature data governance program. So these two are really are tied together. And anytime you create a benefit in one, the other is going to benefit as well. And I see the chat clicking up. Chris, do we have some questions yet, or?
No, not yet.
All right.
That's just me.
All right. So we just talked about kind of how MDM activates data governance, right? So what do we mean by activates? So data governance as a practice is, as we mentioned, embedded in many of the data management capabilities specific to the MDM. MDM has a focus on data quality, but it's really data quality around the critical data for your organization, right? So we have to understand data quality of key attributes to do things like entity resolution, relationship resolution, and managing that data and how it relates to one another. We need to make sure that the necessary attribution is there, that it's filled, right? We need to understand fill rates. We need to understand that it's beholden to standards. And then there's the aspects of RDM too, where we can add the lookup values and things like that help standardize the data, standardize lookup codes and things like that. So MDM is very much embedded in capabilities around data quality, right? Including validation. Specifically here, we're talking about validation as the capability or the feature of MDM as a practice, and the need to identify and really report on, valid and invalid attribution, right? This is very key. A lot of times in a governance program, obviously, you need to be able to see when things are aligned or not aligned to data standards that you're creating. So MDM activates that capability, right? To be able to have that visibility and identify when data is not aligned to standards and report on it as well. Slightly differently, standards and best practice enforcement. MDM practices do have the ability to automatically resolve some of the data quality issues. So when we see data and we identify it, it's one thing, right? And reporting on it, that's great. That's visibility that's imperative to any data governance practice and program. We help activate further data governance by being able to automate resolution of data quality issues. So when you think about data cleansing, data standardization, and data enrichment type of capabilities, these are often embedded into MDM practices, right? And what these end up doing is they improve the data, right? They resolve data quality issues when appropriate by cleansing the data, meaning, we're going to take this data and replace it with a known source of truth of data. And so it's the right format and actually the right data itself. We can standardize it by making sure that it fits correct format, right? And then further, we can enrich it. We can fill gaps in the data when a source doesn't have a specific set of attributes and things like that. We can add that attribution to make that data more holistic, right? All of these are resolving data quality issues, right? And remediating those automatically. So we see them, we understand them, we can act on them, we can resolve them automatically. So again, further activating data governance aspects where we're resolving policy infringement according to data standards created by the governance program.
Hey, Chris, I do have a question for you.
Sure.
And this could also be for the audience because it's an interesting one. So value for client begins when a project for a service provider ends. So clients usually don't like to pay for enablement for value realization. What are some best practices, if there's any, that you've seen in bridging this gap?
In the value realization gap?
Yep.
So best practices are in the beginning of the project, right? This is when you have the attention of usually data stakeholders, business stakeholders. This is simply because they're sponsoring the project usually, right? So they've got money on the table. They're involved in the startup of the projects, things like that. Sometimes we're not involved in that as owners of data, of MDM and other data management practice programs, but you need to be. So getting in there, understanding who those people are, first, the key is identifying it. And we'll get into a little of this, building the network and some of this in a little more detail in a couple more slides too. But enabling and bridging that value gap. It's really all about being able to have the conversation first yourself. So it's enabling yourself to have that conversation, to be able to tie the capabilities of your MDM practice to how they deliver value for the business. It is indirect. So Reltio helps with that by helping provide customers with ways that business value drivers that drive MDM and how MDM delivers that value or enables that value. Simply usually by activating business processes. Awareness a lot of times is just the key, because business users, they're just not aware that under the covers, MDM is there making their data useful, helping them more easily activate. So there's tricks to this. It's not an easy thing, right? But first, it's enable yourself to be able to have that conversation and be able to better attach your explanation of how you provide value. Get out of the technology discussion. Don't talk about how MDM aggregates data and things like that. That's what puts the CMOs and folks like that to sleep in the elevator, right? Talk to them about how you deliver campaign data that they can execute on, right? Talk about as far as you can get to what we consider kind of the activation point of that data, and think about the business processes. Understand the business process that's consuming your data and speak to how you make that process faster, simpler, better, all those type of things. Often it's very hard to quantify the value because you really need to have a deeper conversation with that business partner to understand how their business process delivers dollar for dollar value to the organization. And then you can claim some of that dollar for dollar value to the organization by enabling and improving that business process.
Thanks, Chris.
No problem. Thirdly, on activation, one of the big areas your practice of MDM enables data governance or activates it is through data stewardship workflows and automation. So With Reltio, we have workflow capabilities. So we, out of the box, allow data stewards to do things like data change requests, to do the manual matching if and when that might be necessary, as well as deleting data and things like that. So understanding the aspects of data stewardship, understanding the data stewardship process, and making sure that folks in that data stewardship, process space or in the governance space, the folks that are actually doing the steward work, that they understand that workflow is here, right? It's part of MDM, and that you can support that, right? So we can help activate it, provide the tracking for that, so that these aren't kind of just one-off, if you will, type of activities that occur to steward data only in either consuming systems and or only source systems. So it's all about, really think of it as automation of standards and policies that are already created and generated by the data governance program, right? MDM provides you the ability to automate those and activate those to make them actioned against in real life as data flows throughout the organization.
And just a quick note, Paul or Mike Terry mentions, because part of the value of data governance is that it provides clarity around concepts like data ownership and data quality. Part of the MDM project is discovery and documentation, which is of tremendous value to an organization, even if we haven't finished implementation. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and great point and great segue. It's almost like you were reading the slides, ahead of time, even though they weren't available.
I sent them out before. No, I'm just joking.
And that's exactly what we're going to talk about, right? Is so, next step. So we know MDM practice activates data governance, right? But how do we help build a data governance program, right, through MDM? What can MDM do to help with the build out, right? Because data governance programs are often, obviously, they're disconnected from value, like we talked about. So you're not getting a lot of people excited about participating in data governance. Oftentimes, in the past, they've been highly centralized and authoritarian in device, right? So nobody really wants to participate in those type of activities. And they've been notoriously hard to get off the ground and get running. And what we look at and we recommend is really tied to also the newer approaches around data mesh and data fabric, where the trend is towards democratizing the data. And the goal of that is really to get the data into the business people's hands, right? More effectively, more quickly, help make the business nimble by giving them the data that they need to execute as quickly as possible, right? So it's about that business, agility is kind of what we refer to that as. So how do you still stay agile? How do you support this democratization with agility and add governance on top of that, right? Often just saying that seems like, well, that doesn't work, right? It's a little bit of the chocolate and my peanut butter type of scenario, right? So how can we do that? We look at it from an MDM's perspective here and in the MDM lifecycle, which is a great place. This is kind of the nursery slide. This is where we get into the greenhouse a little bit, if you will. MDM, as you know, right? We've got an enterprise perspective of data. What does that mean? So kind of like we said, we're the central hub of the most critical data within an organization. So the critical entities that the business runs on, that they want to know about, that we are creating, we are generating and aggregating the data around for them, that's there. It's already all right there, right? So the data that runs the business is mastered. It's in one centralized place, which makes it really an ideal place to kind of institute governance practices that impact the entire organization. And we just talked about how we do that, right? We do that automatically. The native activities around MDM activate data governance. So as we bring in this data and we have this, it's already there, right? So it is the perfect place because it is centralized to really start conversations around it, but also to activate data governance around the data that impacts the organization most greatly. Next, data stakeholders. This is, I think, what Mike was really referring to, right? And this is exactly true. Data stakeholders are identified and they're already interested. When we start an MDM program or MDM practice, data stakeholders are brought in They're part of that business, ROI, business case that's being built, and they're champions of the MDM project. They understand the value. They're aligned on the goals and the vision all around data, right? Use this time to onboard them into a governance practice. You've already got their attention. You've got them interested. They're participating in a sharing of data, right, for the enterprise. So they're in the right mindset. You've got them identified and you know who they are, so you don't have to follow the data post-implementation to get to them. So this is a perfect time to actually build out and help build out and extend that data governance practice by bringing the data stakeholders that are already there into the fold for MDM and into helping them understand how MDM activates data governance and what their participation in data governance should look like going forward. Oh, sorry about that. Accidental click. Next, we talk about extending through the MDM lifecycle, extending data governance, that is, through the MDM lifecycle. When we look at an MDM lifecycle, it's not a series of steps, right? It's a series of prioritized actions, and it should be a series of actions that are prioritized based on value that it's going to deliver for the organization. When you bring in new sources, right? When you're adding new consumers, when you're creating new relationships, all the things you do through the life cycle of your MDM practice, all of those are opportunities to work with data stakeholders across the organization, right? And again, to activate data governance within those data products, if you will, across the organization. So by virtue of extending what MDM does and extending the adoption of MDM within your organization, you're by default extending data governance, right? And increasing that participation in stewardship activities, which increases actually the accountability of the data within the business, which is what an ultimate goal of data governance should be.
Chris, quick question.
Yeah.
How do you manage data quality in an organization where mandatory attributes to create like HCP are like first name, last name, email ID? Any thoughts around that?
So there's two types of, we kind of refer to these as two types of systems, right? Systems of engagement.
Hey, Chris, just wanted to elaborate on that question. Just wanted to understand where, in an organization, when the mandatory attributes are very minimum, to create either HCO or HCP. So how can we manage the data quality in those organizations? So that is more of the question.
Yeah. So first step is, and again, this is a perfect segue, but first step is visibility, right? So we'll talk in a moment about how we extend really visibility of those types of issues to the broader data owner network, right? So where data governance, where you do have data governance and data governance is doing reporting, it's really critical to make sure that the MDM KPIs, right, or the metrics that you're tracking around your MDM practice, they should be part of that publication of data governance reports, right? Because you're part of that. You are part of data governance. So key and critical is making sure that the right people can see and understand the issue, right? And understand the impact of that issue. It's one thing to have a conversation around, hey, source system X, the data you're giving me isn't enough, right? That's a good conversation to have. You have to explain the impact, right? So what is that impact from the output that MDM creates and how MDM is, not as able to provide value to the organization, right? So it's similar to that value kind of concept, but it's really important to, on any type of data quality that's impacting you, part of that impact statement needs to be what is that doing to the rest of the organization? So think of it from the consumers that are consuming that, your ability to do the native capabilities of entity resolution and relationship resolution in MDM, and how that inaccurate or incorrect or less than master data, if you will, impacts consumers downstream. So
thank you.
Yeah, explaining that, what that's going to do obviously is that lets you get more attention to it, right? Quite often we all know that source systems are very often legacy systems. They have a fit for purpose use in the business, and the business isn't really going to change the way that they do things very rapidly, especially around legacy systems like the SAPs, or more rigid systems that don't really allow for such changes. But you got to identify where that's not feasible, not possible, because then probably the next step is looking for other data sources where you can enhance that data or enrich that data so you don't have those problems, right? Fill the gaps in the data that exists there through enrichment. But again, somebody's got to understand why that's necessary to the organization, why they need to do it. So the problem statement around that impact is key even for that.
Sorry about that. And there's no questions, but there's a couple of statements from Shashi, and it's a good business case at the start of the project, and measurable success criteria are key to letting stakeholders know the value realization that is upcoming with the project release. So it's kind of back to that value realization. And data governance leads should own and drive the business case and the success criteria.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we talk about some of that. We'll be doing some. I'll give you a quick hint to it, but Chris and I work on a follow-up to this too, where we're going to get into a lot of details around actually building your data governance team, right, and things like that. So,
well, that'd be great.
More and more to come in this, but we'll stick to this. We will touch on some of that though here in a moment as well. And you're talking to some of that right now, right? The strategic alignment piece, right? Strategic alignment is critical to MDM. It's critical to data governance, right? You can't have the program without participation. You're not going to grow it. You're not going to integrate MDM into a data governance program or build a new data governance program if you don't have one without strategic alignment. And that starts with really understanding what's the vision that your organization has for data as far as centralization is regarded. We're hearing a lot about data fabric, data mesh, right? I'm sure we're all hearing it all over the place. Seems like definitions are just getting consolidated. About a year ago, it was everybody kind of had their own understanding of what that meant. But a lot of what data mesh looks to do is decentralize the data, right? Democratize the data. And we talked about that a moment ago. So first, understanding where's the organization at today and where does the organization want to go, right? Are very, very critical to making sure that you're aligning at the right point in time to help the organization reach their vision and their state. Quite often what we see and what research is showing us is, folks are usually somewhere in between mostly centralized and on their way to mostly decentralized. Folks that are on the edge of the curve of adoption curve are aiming towards fully centralized, or fully decentralized, I'm sorry. But we don't really see a lot of people that are quite there just yet. It's a little difficult. So ones that are really ahead of the game are more towards the mostly decentralized, where the data product assets do sit in the business and the business is managing those, but there's still an aspect of enterprise data sets, right, and enterprise-wide data products that are quite necessary, right? And this is kind of where we see probably the most forward organizations sitting at this point in time. Most organizations are mostly centralized at best, and quite a few are still kind of fully centralized, especially around data governance, legacy data governance programs. Again, that tend to be very rigid, usually are wrapped around these fully centralized type of data management capabilities and governance capabilities. So again, the trend is to move towards decentralization to democratize the data. And how MDM can help with that is align to the target state, right? So align MDM for how you're delivering the data, how you're activating data governance, right? And how you're helping build kind of from the ground up this grassroots approach through data owners, right? This democratized and decentralized, federated, if you will, data mesh. And that data mesh really includes the participants in data governance. We talk about it just a second, like attached network of data owners. So if you've got an existing data governance, right, and your MDM practice isn't really quite connected in there, again, take steps to pull them in, follow the data. So this is the case where you already have data in your practice. You're not necessarily tied directly to data governance, but you really should be. They need to be aware of MDM and the way that you are activating data governance for them. And they need to see you as a partner, right? And that helps both of you. So if you don't already have that mutualistic, that symbiotic relationship, and data governance exists in your organization and MDM exists in your organization, you need to bring the two together. Understand who those data owners are by following the data, who's giving you the data, who's the owner of that source, and not the IT owner, right? Who's the business owner of that? What's the business process that data is supporting? What application does it belong to? And who owns that application from a business perspective, right? That's a good way to trace it back. And then same way on the other end of your hub, the consumers of it. Who's consuming it? What are they using it for? What are those systems? What are those applications? And who on the business side owns those? Those are your data owners. Those are the folks that need awareness, right? They should be participating in a governance program if you already have one. And they need to be brought in and understand how MDM activates that, the criticality of MDM in practicing data governance as well. And then what you end up with is MDM ends up being, kind of this hub as well for your data owner network, right? So not that you're mastering data owners. I'm not saying that from a data perspective. I mean, literally from a network of folks that are stakeholders in the data that you're consuming and producing. And I mentioned this a moment ago, another great way to do that, right, and get you embedded into data governance is starting with metrics. So if you're not collecting metrics on your MDM practice today, you should be. Match rates, deduplication counts, false positive, false negative counts so people understand and trust the data. Oftentimes we see that communicating just these simple kind of operational metrics around what MDM is doing for the organization, it lights people up. They haven't seen it before. If you're not producing it, you should focus on that. It's a big part of maturing your MDM practice. And it's a big part of letting people know what MDM is doing for the broader organization because they're blind to it today. So create those KPIs, measure those metrics, publish them, work with data governance through the data owners to make sure that those MDM KPIs are being published as part of a regular reporting of data governance metrics, right? And if you don't have that yet, if you don't have a data governance program, then you can be the first and you can start the data governance reporting with the operational metrics out of MDM. And if you're lucky enough to have Reltio and you've got a data quality dashboard, well, now you've got data quality metrics that you can show the organization about their most important data as well. And you can be the center that starts the data governance reporting, right? And brings this visibility of impact of data to the broader organization. So I blew through real quick, some highly caffeinated today, but just a quick recap. We talked about the synergies between MDM and data governance. And again, it's about the life cycles, right? I mean, they really are symbiotic in nature, and one improves the other, one enhances the other. They are literally like chocolate and peanut butter, they're better together, right? We see this in practice, like we talked about, by extending adoption of MDM, automatically extends data governance and the impact that data governance can have on the organization. We talked about the role of MDM and kind of the governance life cycle. We talked about this through activation, right? So in the governance life cycle, when you've got a model and a framework in there. You've already got standards and policies and best practices in place and defined. And one of the key roles MDM can play is the activator of those policies. It's really difficult. It's really, really difficult to change the way we manage data. So we think about that from the ETL perspective and how complex it is to embed some of these data standards, right, into the ETL flow, let alone into applications across the organization to make sure that, hey, at point of data entry, first names being filled in correctly, right, according to the data standards from data governance. It's difficult to get to there. Those are extremely highly mature organizations, right? And it's quite rare that we actually see it done across the board, to be honest with you. So where MDM can really help is because it's that centralized hub of that critical and core data, you can focus on that core data first. You can activate many of these policies and standards and best practices through data management in MDM. We talked about MDM being a catalyst, right? So how does MDM help data stewardship and how does it help data governance move faster? Again, this is about making sure that you align not just the data stewardship workflows, but from a data stewardship perspective, that's ultimately important. Align data stewardship workflows to the workflows that you have within your MDM practice. Align your standards and policies, right, to the data quality capabilities within your MDM practice, right? So validation, standardization, cleansing, enrichment, all of those. And by doing that, again, anytime you bring a new data set in, anytime you're impacting, a new consumer of your existing data, you're impacting the organization with activated data governance. So instead of having to take these, long programs, if you will, or these long projects to embed a lot of this logic, if you will, across the data management space and across the data supply chain, start with MDM, boom. Doesn't get much faster than that. Strategies, right? We talked about some of the strategies for implementing the two together, really. Again, it's really about staying attached to the people that are already in your champion space. So you've got a series of champions at the start of these data-centric projects. Hold on to them, make them aware of data governance and of MDM. And this will help them better understand the value. There is an enablement perspective to this, right? You can kind of look at it. I think with the advent of data mesh and with stronger desire to move to data democratization, we're finally seeing that the business is recognizing the need for enablement around data management practices, right? So we should see this ease, right, over time, and we should see more interest coming every day from the business to better understand data management practices, including MDM and data governance. So the closer we get to the business being consumers of data products that we're creating and managing, the more tightly we're going to be coupled with the business on that. And will be a lot easier for us to disseminate that kind of relationship between what we're doing and the value that they're getting out of it. So the more they know about data management, the more that helps us strategically, right? So that's a big kind of to-do, really, is enabling the business to know more about data management. And that does include the attachment to value there, and allows them to be more willing, if you will, to participate in data governance. And another aspect of this that we'll get into from a strategy perspective is around the framework, specifically the people piece of the framework. When we talk about democratizing data, this means that the old way of doing data governance, of having a large council that is developing strategies and developing standards for data management and pushing that out into the organization, kind of dictating that to the organization, isn't going to work in that type of space. What works is getting the data ownership to actually happen natively within the business, making data owners accountable for the data and accountable for stewardship activities. And that doesn't happen through creating new jobs, new titles, disrupting the organization. That tends not to work anytime within the business. What it is just adding to people's existing roles, right? Making sure that ownership of the data is understood, that means owning stewardship of the data. We talked a little bit about the reporting aspects of that. Nothing makes people move like, having something visible, right? And if you own the data and it's impacting critical pieces of the organization, and now it's in a report and everybody can see it, you're going to get action on that, right? So,
hey, Chris, a metrics-driven approach to data governance, similar to what is seen in manufacturing for quality control, could help drive the value statement. Are there any, metrics beyond simple attribute quantity and quality? Like how about alignment and misalignment metrics when mastered data is distributed to the data fabric?
Yeah. So trying to understand like how and when data is changed, or, I used to call it unmastering my data, right? Back in the day when consumers would take the data and try to, manage and maintain disparate relationships to that data outside of MDM. No, there's many different reports and ways to do that. Aspects and metrics of data governance aren't just tied to quality. Security is a big one. Availability of the data is a big one. And availability really needs to be looked at in two ways, right? So it's availability from your typical analytical perspective. So yeah, is that data actually available for critical insights and insight generation use cases? But also now we need to understand that data is different. Data doesn't need to exist in two states anymore. You don't need data that is analytical data and data that is operational data. Modern data management systems have data duality. So that data, that same set of data, serves both purposes of operational and analytical. In that analytical space, it's absolutely necessary to understand availability of the data from a performance SLA perspective as well. So those are all aspects that they dive into other areas that maintain and manage and have that data, but they should be surfaced as data governance type metrics too. So security, anything around kind of performance of the data, age of the data are always good ones, right? So understanding that aspect. It's often difficult to do analysis of data across the entire data supply chain to understand that it aligns to some previous state of being mastered. So that's not one that I've seen put into a lot of practice just because it's not an easy one to measure.
So a couple of thought or question here is, we observe that many organizations or businesses are not ready to adopt centralized master data management architecture and want to use MDM more as like a data consolidation hub. So example could be customer onboarding. Will continue to happen in like CRM, ERP with limited data quality and checks. How does Reltio products help in such scenarios? It's a great question.
Yeah. So we help in multiple ways. First, I would say that the perspective of centralized master data management has changed and it's evolved. The legacy approach to MDM really had MDM creating a single version of the truth, right? There was one golden record to rule them all, if you will, right? And we know that doesn't always serve the contextualized needs across the business because those needs are disparate. Use cases are different. So first is to say that modern MDM supports both functions, right? Modern MDM can support the centralized view and the dynamic view that supports more unique or differentiated use cases across the business, if you will. So that's one way to solve kind of that first part of that question is by implementing a practice that can support that more type of modern approach to have a dynamic contextualized view of the mastered entity. Secondly, the back to the source perspective of, we kind of touched on that, right? That it's really difficult to get source systems to change, right? And to have them, adopt, cleansing or validation type criteria at the point of data entry, because it slows the business process or because of, reasons, right? So this is where aspects that are part of MDM can be, applied elsewhere in the data supply chain as well. And the trick here is to develop a mechanism of reporting on data quality issues as soon as possible and getting back to the data owners, right? And this is a part that's always been really difficult about data governance programs, is the establishment of that feedback loop and then an actionable feedback loop, getting the action that's required to actually fix the data at the source, right? So again, as I mentioned before, the first step in that is always visibility, right? Report on it, make it known. The more you build out that network of data owners, the more that they understand that. So it's really important to have that communication up front before we just start reporting on data quality metrics coming from specific sources, right? But absolutely that data governance approach and view and bringing that out to the enterprise will help you make those changes happen. Can't say that they're going to go change SAP and things like that are much more rigid to make people put the data in correctly. But at least, if you can take a step towards getting the data owners to take action on data that they're creating that's bad data, and to change the data in their systems, that's still a step. Even though it's reactive, it's still a step in the right direction.
Thanks, Chris.
So from Reltio's perspective, obviously the data quality report, right? Sharing some of that data with the data owners so that they understand, the source data owners understand the data that they're giving you and what the gaps are, and working with them on ways that they can remediate that. Working with the data supply chain teams that are moving the data in and across the organization to understand where can we put these validation checks that Reltio is doing, and identifying it here further upstream and closer to the source of the data so that we can report that back and provide workflow mechanisms and things like that for these data owners to actually operate and fix that data.
Hey, Chris, is there any data quality score functionality or out of the box functionality that can be used to report the key attributes that are populated or not?
The data quality dashboard in Reltio does show fill rates and things like that on the critical attributes, right? On all the attributes actually, and you can outline the ones that are critical to your matching strategy, right? Is a good way to look at those. Again, the data quality dashboard is something that it's definitely mutable. You can change it for your perspective on that UI that you would like to see, and if that's things you want to do and aren't clear on how, absolutely make sure you contact your CSM and support and work through how you can get that view of the data that you want to see. We used to have the DQ scoring, if you recall, a while back, but I think the DQ dashboard is more where you want to go, and if you want to develop a means and way of scoring that, we can look at how the DQ dashboard can reflect it.
Yeah, and we have a show that we did sometime back on that dashboard. I'm trying to find it now. So,
thanks, Chris.
Sure. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Not right now.
All right. Well, let me go back one real quick before you talk about that. So, lastly, a quick call to action. I really want your feedback on this one. This is a really big topic. So yeah, we skim the clouds on this one, right? We want to get into more detail with you all. I want to know what you want to know more about. We are planning on a follow-up session for a deeper dive into building a framework for data governance, right? So we'll get more specifically data governance. It will be from the perspective of master data management and Reltio, but should be applicable across the board, right? So this gets into the people, process, and technology, how you actually establish that, what it looks like, nouns and verbs of all this stuff, all that fun stuff. So that is definitely one we're planning on and following up. I'm just surprised to Chris because I haven't told him I was wanting to do that pretty soon here just yet. But anything else around the data governance, this is a very, very important topic. It's only going to get more important as data mesh and data democratization becomes more and more popular and more nearer to us all. So,
Chris, I do think Deborah has a question.
Cool. Cool.
Deborah, go ahead. If you're asking, I can't hear you. You're off of mute, but yeah, I still can't hear you. Keep going, Chris. I mean, Deborah, feel free to jump in because right now we just can't hear you at the moment.
All right. No, that was my beg for, provide feedback on this session. Let us know what you want to know more about, right? Chris always sends that survey out. So, I urge you, please take it and let me know specifically around data governance. What are the things you want to know? And we can tailor some content for future webinars in and around that as well.
Session on Reltio Integration Hub. We have lots of sessions that have already been done. And what I can do is push that. We are going to have more sessions on Reltio Integration Hub, but if there's specific ones that you want or looking at for RIH, let us know.
Because I'm definitely open to doing more, certainly Reltio Integration Hub sessions. Absolutely. If you go to the next slide, Chris. Again, Data Driven is a conference that we are sponsoring in a big way. Would love for you to register today. So do that. And I've already put the stuff in the comments for earlier. So, and anything else, Chris? I think that's it. So make sure you take the survey at the end. So one is if you have specific ideas on our next session or things that you want to cover, we are all ears. Certainly want to do more Reltio Integration Hub stuff. And there is a question from Deborah. She goes, my question is, does the data quality dashboard integrate with data catalogs such as Elation? It's a good question.
So the DQ dashboard that we have is aware of the data that's in Reltio today. So, Elation as a data cataloging utility, those data catalogs usually aren't in Reltio. So Reltio today does not connect to those Elation data catalogs to also report on that as well.
Okay.
Other than that, thank you so much for coming. And we look forward to next week. So I hope to see you guys next week. Chris, thank you so much for hosting another show. Really appreciate it. And I look forward to the next one with you. So
yeah, so do I. Thanks, everyone. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.